Alright. We're shooting a video on my phone because I don't have my Fuji anymore. I actually sold it. I'm buying a 200 to 600 Sony, so I expect more wildlife photography more recently, soon. Fuck. We're shooting a video about why I suggest you shoot RAW over JPEG. Nothing necessarily wrong with JPEG, it's just a compressed file format. So while I have 128 gig SD cards, and two of them in fact, I still shoot RAW, even though with JPEGs I can get over 20,000 shots. Let me show you. Set the camera up to JPEG. JPEG uncompressed, as you can see on the back screen there. I'll focus it. You can get about 20,000 shots on it. Now, 20,000 photos, probably don't need that many on two cards, but when you come to shooting RAW, I only get about 5,000, and the reason for that is both of them are uncompressed, but one of them is so uncompressed it's not actually done anything with the data other than store it together. So RAW files are a lossless compressed file. You can compress them to get them even smaller still, but usually you would shoot uncompressed if you're shooting RAW. There's not too much benefit from it. So when shooting RAW, you typically want to expose for the highlights. So you want to make sure your highlights aren't overexposed and that your shadows are probably going to be underexposed, but if you're shooting at a low enough ISO, you can pull that back quite easily. With shooting in RAW, you have a lot more creative freedom about your colors, your lighting, your subject matter, your depth of field, your aperture. You have everything is under your control essentially. Whereas with shooting with JPEG, you have to be very accurate about what you're wanting from the photo. You have to make the photo in that image, because editing it afterwards, although now, you know, things like Fuji and Sony's JPEGs are very, very good, and you can retain a lot of detail in the JPEGs, you'll find that your shadows and your highlights won't be able to be, you can't come back from them quite as easily. And also, just in general, it's a good practice to shoot in RAW because you're less likely to have some kind of compression issues and artifacting in the images when it comes to the camera itself compressing and making it a JPEG, because your camera will shoot in RAW regardless. It's just once it's shot the RAW image, it compresses it and makes it into a JPEG image. So you are adding another step to the whole camera's editing process essentially. And a lot more cameras have a higher dynamic range in RAW. For instance, the Sony a7 III has around about 14 to 15 EVs of dynamic range, whereas in a JPEG form, you're probably looking more around about the 11 to 10. Which, once again, 11 to 10 stops of dynamic range in a JPEG is still quite a lot, and you can still retain a lot of detail from that. But if you have more, it's usually merrier, and the fact that you get so many more images is not exactly that useful. Now, there is a lot of cameras that can't shoot RAW, just purely from the fact that they don't feel the user, in the end, needs a RAW file. So a lot of compact cameras, in the cheaper end, a lot of Sony, Canon and Panasonic compacts can shoot in a RAW format up into the higher end models. So things like the RX100 series, Canon's G5 and G7X, and Panasonic's TZ100s, a lot of them can shoot in RAW, but a lot of them would just suggest you shoot in a JPEG format. You'll find with a JPEG format, the camera actually understands the noise patterning of the image, so it has a very, very good noise reduction software inbuilt for the actual camera to read out of. Now, with RAW, they don't apply that at all. So your noise patternings you'll find from a JPEG to a RAW file are going to be much different. You'll find the JPEG will have a lot smoother, a lot cleaner image up into the higher ISOs, just because your camera knows, hey, we're in a high ISO, slap on some noise reduction, bish bash bosh, you got a clean image. Other than that, there's not too much to talk about when it comes to RAW and JPEG. They both give a great image. You'll find your RAW files will be a lot less contrasty, so you will have to increase your contrast saturation and you'll have to make it a little bit more to your style. But with JPEGs, like I said, you don't have that play as much anymore. But shoot whatever you want. They're both good, and you'll both, at the end of the day, have a great image. So, keep doing what you're doing. Peace.